he was very careful about how he spoke about the Wagner fighters. Rebellion or not, I think Putin still needs them to fight his war in Ukraine.
Uliana Pavlova is a Russian-Ukrainian journalist and joins us now. Morning to you, Uliana.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Great pleasure as ever. What did you make of what Putin had to say? It seemed to be both tough and conciliatory. It wasn't quite clear what the purpose of it was.
I think you're right in your assessment that Putin was very vague in his speech, and he said a lot of strong words, but at the same time, he didn't say anything. I think what stood out to me is that he was very careful about how he spoke about the Wagner fighters. Rebellion or not, I think Putin still needs them to fight his war in Ukraine. And Putin could have easily ordered to arrest those Wagner commanders for treason, but instead he offered to pardon them and I think reform them, the Wagner forces, into the Ministry of Defense. So I think this indicates that they are actually very efficient in what they do. But also, there is a Wagner fighter presence in Africa and the Middle East, and they represent Putin's regime's interests there too. So the whole situation is rather awkward.
Do you feel this is the first, now we've had a bit of time to think about this, is this going to be seen as the first step in the eventual dethronement of Putin? This is the first crack, and then other people will rebel, other military commanders will refuse to follow his orders. Is that a plausible scenario, or is this Putin has faced down the crisis and it is now passed?
I think this rebellion will leave a significant crack in Putin's reputation. I think this is pretty fair to say. But, Putin sort of also avoided the worst case scenario, which would have been, a civil war style fight and bloodshed and the shelling of the cities. So I think what is interesting is that there was sort of this passive loyalty. As Prigozhin was marching towards Moscow, he wasn't really stopped, but he also, I think, wasn't really actively supported. Nobody really came out for him in the big way.
Yeah.
And I think maybe Prigozhin was counting on a little bit more support inside of some of the Russia's institutions.
Does that also show that the Russian people themselves are still pretty either subservient to Putin or supporting of Putin? That actually this could have been a flame that was lit and could have gone off everywhere, but it didn't feel that there was a popular movement behind him.
Yes, as we have already talked about in the past, Russian people are really passive and apolitical. And what happened in Rostov, and the people in Rostov could only be described as curious onlookers. Yeah. They were taking pictures with the tanks, chatting with the militias. A lot of people, majority of Russian people, missed what happened this weekend. I talked to a lot of people in Russia, and not even all of them are aware that Russia was on the brink of civil war this weekend. So I don't think the mood, for a really big uprising or civil war is there yet.
Did the Ukrainians take advantage of this? Will they take advantage of it? I'm struck by how little information is coming out of the counter-offensive. At the beginning of the war, when Russia was failing left, right and centre, and the resistance of Ukraine was stout, we couldn't move for news stories about how well Ukraine was doing. That seems to have slowed down to a trickle, the positive news stories about fighting for the Ukrainians. Is that because the counter-offensive is not going well? Has the events of the weekend changed the trajectory of the counter-offensive in any way?
I think Ukrainians were counting on this rebellion to be their chance, to be their opportunity to retake some land and succeed in the counteroffensive. But because it only lasted 24 hours, I don't really see how they made significant progress on the front lines. And I think actually this kind of is tied back to the question of Putin's rule and whether we're going to see more of this in the future. I think the success of Ukraine's counteroffensive in the coming months would have a lot to do with it.
Yeah, but we're not there yet. Uliana, great to speak to you. Thank you for joining us today.